Hello, and welcome back to How to Change the World, the podcast for changemakers, and it equips our changemakers with the inspiration, the tools, and the insights they need to drive meaningful impact. I am Catherine Alonzo, and today I am joined by one of my favorite people on the planet, Luis Ávila. Luis, welcome.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for the invitation. I'm so happy to be here.
And we did a long form interview about 6 months ago. That is episode 158. So I encourage everybody to go and listen to that, where Luis shares his personal story, how he came to the work that he does, and some really fantastic insights about the importance of engaging communities. But today we're going to do something a little bit different. We call this our Changemaker Chat, and it's really just a shorter check-in with change makers in the field. And honestly, I can't think of a better time to do this. I want to note that we are recording this on Friday, February 7th. And I feel like between now and when it airs, which is a week or two, a lot could happen that we don't reference. And so that's kind of my disclaimer. But Luis, do you want to start off just by introducing yourself?
Yeah, my name is Luis Ávila, and I'm a community organizer, president of Iconico, a firm that helps organizations and individuals do big things in the world.
Awesome. So it's a big question, but how are you doing?
You know, I'm doing okay. I think that the best I have, Catherine, is that I'm just trying to do my best. I'm trying to do the best I can. I'm trying to be helpful. I'm trying to figure out where do I show up to be helpful to others. And then finally, I'm hoping and trying not to be distracted. That's how I am. So I am just trying my best, and I think that's the best I can do.
Yeah, I think isn't that the best any of us can do? I feel the same. When I'm sort of out and about and I run into people and they say, you know, how are you? I'm struggling to answer that question at the moment, I am finding. And one answer to the question is, you know, I'm good. There's a lot to be grateful for in life on a personal level, and also just the people that I'm surrounded by. I really consider it a privilege to get to work with people who are feeling as passionately in this moment as I am. And then, of course, the other answer is there's just so much grief and fear and exhaustion and just all of those things. And so what I'm sort of figuring out, I've been thinking about this a lot this week, is I think this next period of time, however long it's going to be this like messy combination of both all the time. Figuring out how I articulate that to others, but even how I understand that for myself is something I guess I'll figure out.
Yeah, I think, Catherine, that one of the things that when I'm having a hard time in my life, I usually try to visualize to make sense of things. So, you know, when I'm grieving, I have this visualization about the like getting tumbled in the ocean. But right now, actually, you know, when the fires were happening in Los Angeles, I was really thinking that the best algorithm, the best system that exists in this planet, it's actually the natural world. It adapts so quickly, it adapts so well that even when we're not here, the natural world will be here. And, you know, when I was looking at the fires, I thought, you know, we are so much to blame for these fires everywhere in the world, but they have been happening for a long time. So how does the natural world adapt to these fires? And in some ways, I'm thinking, Catherine, of this moment as a forest fire, right? And the first thing that I read was that there's these chemicals from trees that are released to send information and send signals to people, to animals or other beings, bugs and everything, to get out of the danger, right? To stay away from the danger. And I thought about that, and I thought about the importance right now of ensuring that the information we're sharing is verified, that we're not creating more chaos or more confusion. I feel like there's so much information coming to us. You know, we've heard or read on the news that this strategy from the Trump administration called flood the zone, right? Like where they shock you with so much stuff that they distract us and they pull us thin so that we can, you know, properly plan and be on our 2 feet. So for me, one of the really important things to do is to make sure that we are really discerning the information that we're sharing out, that we're putting out. If it's just, you know, I think for vanity, or if it's a real purpose to put information out there. So that was the first thing I thought about. The second one was that, you know, the trunks of trees actually have gotten thicker to sustain the fire. And I thought about protection, right? In particular, I'm an immigrant from Mexico. So in which ways I can ensure that I am also part of the protection of other undocumented people or other immigrants in the community. And one of the ways is that in the eyes of the law, I might be as undocumented as, any other person in this country because of the color of my skin, my accent, where I live, etc. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is really to ensure that I am protected by, exercising my rights. So there are a million resources out there about that, and it's really important. But then the third one, and the most important, Catherine, for me, is that I read that these pines fall from the trees after fires, and it is because of the heat that they open and they let out the seeds. And I thought about how beautiful that is, that what if we were the seeds after the fire? What if we start imagining what do we want to do after this time of darkness? Because it will be over, it will be done, and it will be done because of us. So we have to be prepared for that and start dreaming about what is next. And I think we can do both. We don't have to just do both, one of them.
I love that. I love that so much, particularly this idea of seeds. It's something I've been thinking about a lot. And one of the moments that this reminds me of is when I was sort of coming up politically in Arizona in 2010 was when SB 1070 was introduced in the state legislature, a bill that was, I think, referred to at the time as the Show Me Your Papers law, which is really targeting people in our community who are immigrants or look like they might be immigrants. And so, a lot of people became politically active at that time. And a lot of those people who at the time were high school students or recently graduated, I know, I have friends who changed careers at that time to become more politically involved, today are leading organizations, leading movements. They have, it's really kind of shaped their lives and their career. And I do remind myself of that there are seeds. I really like that you used that analogy. There are seeds being planted. And so part of it is for me balancing the difference between grappling with what's happening in the current moment, and so much is happening, with not losing my eyes on the long game, in which I truly do believe that we will prevail. I just think that people are going to be hurt in the meantime, and that's really difficult to grasp.
But I think also, Catherine, part of that is that this sense of, the hyper-information era that we're living kind of leaves us in some ways inefficient or insufficient to action, right? So we have so much information that enrages us, that makes us feel like we have to do something about it. Of course, how can we not, right? But there's so much to do. So one thing that I keep reminding myself is, I cannot do it all. There's no reason why I should be doing it all. There are enough people out there in the world who are taking this and are doing something about it. And I'm going to show up and support. And one of the things, for example, Catherine, is that this week, there's been protests almost every day from, young people against the mass deportations all across the state, all across the United States. The media hasn't picked it up so much, but there's 2 or 3 protests a day from young people. These people who are not part of organizations, they don't have a narrative training. They're just showing up because they're angry and they don't know where to put their anger. And the best way to put it is take the streets, chant, and protest. And I've been showing up to some of those, Catherine, just to observe and learn, what is it that they're saying? And I want to tell you, sometimes I'm like baffled or enraged by the things that are happening. But at the same time, I'm like, that's not my role, right? Like my role has been, when I show up, is to be security. I've asked them several times, like, hey, are you thinking about crossing streets? Can I help, stop traffic? I get ahead of some of the times when I see police officers in gear, and I'm trying to ensure that I put myself in between them so there's no violence and attacks. So there's been like this sense of like, I've been doing this for a while. I know what to do. I don't need to be a general. I can be a soldier, and I can just show up and learn. And that is such a different place to be, Catherine, because it gives purpose. It gives you inspiration, but at the same time, it makes you realize that these things are bigger than us, and they're happening, in front of our eyes. And the best thing that we can do is just show up, and that makes me feel already a little bit better and a little bit more hopeful.
Yeah, I think that there's 2 groups that are really going to lead in this moment. One is young people, and 2 is community-based, locally driven organizations. And I think that community-based organizations are just better positioned to drive meaningful impact because they have the trust of the community. There's such low trust in political parties, particularly the Democratic Party right now, institutions, corporations, even government leaders. And so community-based organizations. And so I've been thinking a lot about how do I show up not to lead either one, but just as a, like you said, as a soldier. How do I show up to spaces led by young people and contribute in a way that's valuable without needing to lead? And then how do I do the same thing with community organizations? And that'll evolve. I think something that there's always the ability to donate for those that have it, but then
Well,
figuring out what does that look like on an ongoing basis is something I've been thinking about.
that is so powerful, Catherine, because you're right. I've been really grappling with the idea that this moment there's very little action we can give people to take that it's actually meaningful beyond protesting, right? And I've been really thinking about this anger that these young people have had turned into, in some areas, into violence or into confrontations with police. And there's all kinds of opinions about that out there in the world, and that's not what we're here for. But one of the things that I really believe is that also community organizations are having to make sense of it, right? Like where are we channeling these activities? Where are we channeling these actions? And I think that community organizations are in some ways also the best position, as you were saying, to work with people, but it depends so much on philanthropy, and it depends so much on, this donor base, right? That it's out there in the community that are also feeling all kinds of confused and trying to figure out what to do. And I think there's a vacuum right now in some ways in communities, right? Where like young people are feeling them while we figure out in community organizations and philanthropy what to do. The emergency is here, right? Like the fire is here. The fire is happening. And we cannot, operationalize ourselves out of this, right? We have to also just take risks and get out there. And as community organizations also just, accompany some of these people to learn from them, even if they have a lot to learn from us because we've been doing this work for a while. The truth is that we can learn a lot from their energy, from their anger, asking questions about what actions can we take. And I think at the root of this is what I'm really most confused about is what can we do right now that is not being angry and confused,
Yeah. And one of the things I've been thinking about a lot, Luis, is we tend to, just as people, but I think those of us in social change, it's really easy to overlook our contributions. And one of the things I've really been saying to my team is don't forget that something that seems maybe not very effective or helpful to you can be a real lifeline for somebody else. And so, for example, even being able to have conversations with other social change leaders where we just say, yeah, this sucks and this is so difficult, has provided somewhat of a lifeline for me and hopefully for those that I've been able to engage in conversation with. And there is value in that. That, even if like sometimes that it feels like you're not doing anything, you are doing something. What you had earlier talked about grief. When I'm grieving, the people that know me really well, just sending me a message that's like thinking of you or checking in, it can really give me something to just keep me going, even if they maybe feel like they're not doing much, they're doing a lot.
Yeah, I think, Catherine, what you're also pointing to is that it is also very easy for us to feel like we're not doing enough, we're not doing at all, we're not, it's not meaningful. And one thing that I feel is like it's as easy as telling people that they're that it matters what they're doing, but also if they're not doing anything and resting and feeling bad and being in bed, like that's fine too,
Yeah.
I texted a friend yesterday who works in a really large institution here who is like, I don't know why we're policing ourselves, right? Like why we are already doing the work for the administration of changing things within, actually there's no law to do it. Like we're just doing it proactively to protect ourselves. And I was telling them, how important it is for them to protect themselves in the midst of being in this disappointment, right? And who you can talk to inside, and how do you feel about talking to them? And later last night we were texting each other, and she talked to legal counsel, and she realized that there were things that they could be done, but she hasn't said it. She hadn't asked the question. So one of the things is that we sometimes are also inside institutions or places, right, where we feel insufficient. That the instrument is insufficient to the amount of change we want to see in the world. So it is important to remind ourselves that we're just human, that the little things we can do is even ask questions, is even, ask if it's possible in the places where we are. And that's enough. And if not, being with each other and accompanying each other, it's also enough.
I couldn't agree more. Let's take a quick ad break, and then I want to ask you about time.
Okay.
You seeking to create change at the polls? Us too. With Javelina's long history of running winning campaigns, we've learned a thing or two about mobilizing communities. And we know that success isn't about reaching every voter, it's about reaching the right voters. Head over to javelina.co today to sign up for a free consultation and learn how our tailored direct mail services to bring voters into your story and drive your campaign to victory. Okay, welcome back. So, Luis, I want to ask you about how, at the moment, you are thinking about time. Are you thinking about, I need a strategy to get through the next 4 years? Are you taking it day by day? How is time coming up in your conversations with other people engaged in the movement, if it is?
That's a really interesting thing, Catherine, because the one thing that I keep telling people that worries me the most is that we think of this as a 4-year thing.
Right.
The issue is that the administration that we live in and that we elected, as a country, it's a product of a larger problem that we have in the United States right now, which is where people feeling dispossessed and people feeling like they don't belong or they're not counting. And that kind of sense, and I think it's important across, by the way, class, race, gender, we need to have real conversations about why is this country in such deep trouble when it comes to our self-identities and our self-appreciations. The president of Mexico gave a speech telling to the American people, you should be asking yourselves, why are your people so addicted to drugs? And I was just thinking about how interesting, right? Like the war on drugs have been on the substance and not on the root causes. And I feel like if we try to put this into Trump or into one administration, those real problems that are in this country are not going to be solved. So one of the things that I'm thinking about is, what are the populations that I need to be working? I tell people, these are the times to build legacy. These are the times that you want to feel so good that you can leave this world and what you did, it's okay, right? And I'm going to tell you, in my case, Catherine, I'm going back to basics. I'm going back to actual community organizing where I'm working with a group of immigrants right now to put together a theater show that it's in Spanish. I'm doing a workshop for immigrants to write speculative fiction about what does it mean to be an immigrant and imagine yourself in the future in this country. Do you exist? Are you here? How is it? Is it good? Is it bad? And, those simple things that, are not kind of life changing, right? I'm working with handfuls of people feel so meaningful. And that is how far I can see, Catherine, right? Like working with these groups of people that I can have access to. That's how far I can see, because I think that if I start thinking about electoral cycles, for example, I keep being disappointed of the outcomes of electoral cycles, not only because of who wins, but also because sometimes if we win, really the change that we want to see, it's not sustained or it just simply doesn't happen. So I am also trying to think outside of our electoral systems. What is that we can do to build cohesiveness and relationships and more tetherness and ask some of these really difficult questions. And if I can do that in the communities that surrounds me, if I can organize a neighborhood where I live in, which is what I'm doing right now, I feel a little bit more purpose. And I feel thinking that the next 4 years will only take my soul away, to be honest, because at the end of the day, governments change, but we don't. We're here, so we got to figure out what to do.
I'm so glad we're talking about this, because as we do, I'm realizing that this is something that's really I've really been struggling with, because, I'm having conversations out and about and I start a sentence that might end with, for the next 4 years. And I can't make myself say the words because I don't think I really believe that the impact will be limited to 4 years. Some of the policies will shape, change, destroy entire communities and people's lives. And also, the tone change, especially around, not especially, but one of the things that makes me think of is the tone change associated with identity and telling people what their identity is and what it is possible to identify with. That I mean, that is something that lasts. And, if that drumbeat comes from leadership of this country, and this country has tremendous impact around the world over and over and over and over for a prolonged period of time, it isn't just 4 years. It takes, I don't know, too long, too much to reverse that.
You've been in rooms where people talk about something Ronald Reagan did. We're still living the consequences right now, right?
Right.
So I feel like young people right now in the streets, in some ways, intrapersonally might be thinking, this country doesn't want me here. This country doesn't want my parents here. And that level of anger shapes the person, right? That shapes their psyche, shapes their traumas. I mean, that already intrapersonally, who we believe we are, it's already changing, right? And now interpersonally, it's a whole other thing. When I was insecure in one of the marches, there was this white woman in a car who tried to run over, a group of people because she was like impatient. She didn't want to let them cross the street. And she almost hit people. And I was so baffled by like the lack of humanity of this person. Right behind her was another white woman who was patiently waiting. And the protesters went to her car and tried to harass her because they were angry at the last woman who passed, Yeah. And I just realized like these, again, interpersonal relationships are going to change in this country. Who we believe the other is, it's also something that's going to change. And I mean, talking about institutions, the fact that philanthropy is proactively, or, universities are proactively, complying with DEI stuff without actually having a law, it's already a change is going to change by decades, right? For already
decades.
I mean, USAID in the systemic level, when the United States doesn't have the leverage to negotiate with other countries, through aid or investments, China and Russia come in, and that is going to take decades, as well. So every single way in 2 weeks, we can already see the impact that this is going to have in generations,
Yeah. So I couldn't agree more. So therefore, I think that for me, I need 2 time horizons. I need long-term vision, and that doesn't really need to be defined by a number of years, but just in the future. It can be beyond my lifetime. It can be beyond generations of lifetimes, but in the future, something that we are working toward. And for me, that's a vision of equity and kindness. Those are really the 2 values that I would like to see more of in the world and how we communicate with each other. And then the other time horizon is now. And I think that is going to fluctuate between 1 day and 7 days. Like, what do we need to do now, right in this moment, and then for the next week? And you can't get too much further than that, because if you get attached to a plan, it makes you less flexible to the next thing that comes down the pike. And I think that for me, and maybe this time thing isn't helpful for other people, but for me, it's been a real barrier that I need to know what my planning horizon is. It reminds me a lot of the pandemic in that way. I struggled at the beginning of the pandemic because I felt like I needed to know.
And we didn't know.
And we didn't know. And not only did we not know, but we were grossly wrong. Like originally I was planning for like 2 weeks of remote work, and then a month, and then I just stopped. Eventually I just sort of let go. And I think for now with this, I need to do the same thing. I need to let go of any kind of short-term time horizon. And there's 2. There's like long-term vision and what do I do right now?
I think that's so beautiful, Catherine, because I do think I do not want to have attachments to time right now because things are so changing so much, right? But I do know that seeds need to be planted for the future, right? And I think you mentioned 1070, and this reminds me a lot of 2005, 2006 here in Arizona at this moment where like there was a lot of hate and there's a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment brewing. And I think nationally we're kind of like in a similar place than 2006. But when we got by 2010, 4 years later, 5 years later, stuff was really tough, right? And one of the things I remembered is that we did a debrief a few years ago about 10 years later, how did it go, right? And we were all proud of the institutions we built, the power we built, the people we were. The one thing I remember bringing up was that we forgot to dream. We were in such a focus of fighting and defending ourselves that we forgot to actually, already manifest and claim what we wanted in that future and be that clairvoyant people that we are. And that's what I don't want to forget this time, right? So I don't know when, but for example, you said equity and dignity and these values that are so important. For me, Catherine, what's going to be really important in the future is that I don't want to think about policies anymore as I want to think about ideals. So, I've been fighting for immigration reform for over 20 years and it hasn't happened. Yet the actual vision that I want to look in the future is that immigrants and people in general, just humans, are able to move around, with dignity, and that are able to live and be received and seen as the assets that they are, as many of us are, And if I want to live in that world, policy is just one thing, but narrative and sentiment and all these things need to be thought of. And I feel we've been so narrow thinking about just the ways that we are going to enact, the thing, instead of thinking how we're going to live this. So that's what I want to do in a lifetime, in the vision of the future, is how can I practically transform that vision of equity and dignity into actual populations or people that I want to see. So when we as a human race, or maybe here as Americans, believe that immigrants are an asset that will help us build and they are welcome and they have the right, just as I have the right to move to the Midwest when there's no water in Arizona. No, those things of migration hopefully are accepted at some point, and that's going to be the labor that I think I'm going to dedicate my life to.
I really love that, because I think that in anything that you're trying to do, there's more often than not one form of measurement that's quite easy to see and that gets focused on, and then other forms of measurement that are harder to see and that those get forgotten. So an analogy might be, let's say somebody is trying to become more healthy. So they're focusing on their food intake and they're moving, exercising their body more. The easy measurement is the number on the scale and potentially body measurements. And that gets like really, really, really focused on. But there's all these other measurements, you're just feeling better, making it a little bit easier to get up in the morning, having more energy, enjoying your activities more, maybe having more social time because you're walking or you're running with somebody. And those things are really important, maybe even more important than the number on the scale, but they're harder to measure. So we get so focused on this idea of weight when really it's just sort of one way to measure to measure success. And then another analogy is this idea of being wealthy. Yeah. So we usually measure wealth with money, right? Yeah, like how much money do you have? But there's tons of ways to be wealthy. You can be wealthy in love, you can be wealthy in time, you can be wealthy in social connection.
Generationally wealthy you can be,
Right. Exactly. There's a whole other kind of privilege. And so this idea of there's a lot of different ways we can shape the world, and politics and policy is one way. Yeah. And it's the way that gets a lot of attention, but there's tons of ways.
And policy changes when we change, as society. Yes. That's a powerful thing here. It's like, and right now we're doing it again, right? And there we go, thinking, how do we convince MAGA board? Like, no, that's not the question we should be asking. Right. There are 22 million people who didn't come out to vote, and many other millions who never vote because they don't believe in this thing, and we're putting all our eggs in this thing.
Right. Right. How can we engage? Yeah. So rather than make them engage in our system, how can we maybe engage in a different way? Yeah, so true. Okay, so I want to ask you about one more thing, which is, what is the story that we need to tell right now, and who do we need to tell it to?
One of the things I think is most important, Catherine, is that we need to make sure that we remember that this is simply a person with other people around them in the administration that are making decisions. And yeah, they're very powerful, but they're not more powerful than us. We have so many assets as communities. And one of the things is that we have to remember ourselves of our power, because the thing about this analogy you were talking about with exercise is that when you keep seeing that you don't change the scale, right, you then give up and actually get worse, right? You get then more unhealthy because you're like, well, that doesn't work. So then let's just go the other way. And I am worried about people losing hope, people losing the ability to dream of a different future, right? I saw a quote the other day about how impossible it seems to change systems, right? But there was a time where we thought that it was impossible to not have kings, right? Or where we thought it was impossible for, Black people to not be in bondage or women to vote, right? With all these things that are so fundamental to now who we are. And that are really depart from liberation and freedom, right? And really ensuring that we feel liberated as humans. And I think that that's what I want to make sure that I remind. That's why I'm going to the arts, actually. That's why I'm going to theater and writing, because, I feel that that's where this liberation is allowed, right? Like the group of immigrants I'm working with are working on a show about a man who becomes a dog and is exploited by the humans. And they want to have a conversation with the audience. And it's a comedy, by the way. They want to have a conversation with the audience about how does it seem similar to immigrants who are only labor to this country, and are not more than that. And I thought like that was so powerful. It allows us to have a conversation that's so complex from a comedy. So that is where I think, we need to think about culture as an instrument of change right now. We need to have conversations, and the story we need to tell is like, at the end of the day, we cannot lose our humanity. And as humans, we live and we survive because we understand each other and we talk and know each other's stories. And I think that's what we need to be doing right now. And I actually believe that the people who are most impacted right now by these changes are the ones who need to be speaking and need to be leading, need to be given spaces, including, for example, in the immigrant rights movement, Spanish-speaking immigrants who are the large amount of the population are not leading these conversations right now. So I want to create spaces for these folks to say, do we exist? Do we know? How do we see this future? And that is, for me, a really critical part. For me, at least in the population that I'm close proximity with, is the one where I'm going to start, right? I'm not going to say, I'm going to go work with like rural people in, middle of Midwest. Like, that's not my people, right? Like, I'm going to work where I am most proximate to, whoever that is most proximate to us.
Yeah. And which brings us back, I think, to this idea of the organizations that are really going to be impactful are those that are doing exactly that are embedded in their local community and putting all of their energy into the people that they work with and for.
Yeah, that's exciting. I think it's an exciting moment. I think it's an exciting moment to build legacy for all of us. As humans, it's an exciting moment for us to reimagine how we're going to approach leadership. It's an exciting moment for us to imagine how we're going to approach government and governing. All of those things. While we heard, we cannot stop thinking about the future as well.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Something I've learned as a business owner, having led and grown a business now for 13 years, is that, in the life cycle of a business, there are moments that are hard. Client relationships and staffing changes, budgetary shortfalls, like these really hard moments. And in every single one of my hardest moments, having led Javelina, what turns out is that the changes we make and the seeds we sow in those hardest moments end up becoming the source of our best moments. If I think about the very best moments, the bits I'm most proud of, the best client work, the biggest wins on behalf of our staff, the policy changes we make as a company that I'm really proud of, if I follow the thread all the way back to the beginning, it usually came from the hardest bit.
From a struggle. Yeah. That is so beautiful, Catherine. Such a good reminder about that. That's what we cannot let go. That's what we cannot let go as people,
Right. Luis, thank you so much. This has been like therapy for me. So I really appreciate you just taking the time and your honesty and transparency. And I really am inspired by the work that you do, and honestly just feel better knowing that you are in our community with your passion and doing the best that you can, and lots of people like you. So
thank you, Catherine. Thank you for creating these spaces. Thank you for inviting me.
I hope that you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. I think that it is going to propel me certainly through my day and through the days to come. And chances are I'm going to come back and listen to that one. I don't always listen to our own podcast episodes because it's kind of painful to listen to your own voice. But this one, I think I'm going to re-listen to. I think I'm going to need it. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. My question for you is, if you did, I would really appreciate it if you would leave us a rating and review on whatever platform you listen to. It really helps us grow. And I just feel like right now, more social change makers need these resources and these conversations, and to be able to connect with the incredible, inspiring change makers that gift us their time and expertise and insights. And so you would be doing me and the change makers, just like you, such a solid if you would leave that rating or review and help us grow. Until next time, when I cannot wait to share another story of change with you, I hope you have a great one.